Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses, congratulations for your nominations. There's a beautiful phrase in the New Testament in both the Gospels of Luke and Matthew that goes something like this: from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. And Mr. Lohmeier, I want to ask you about your very active mouth and what it reveals about your heart. Your tweeting. And I'll just give you a few examples. August 9, 2024, the left lies about nearly everything it does, and tens of millions of Americans believe the lies. So trashing the left and calling tens of millions of Americans dupes. August 2nd, 2024, if today you're wondering why the left and Mitt Romney seem to have entirely lost any semblance of a moral compass, Vladimir Lenin provides you the answer. April 1, 2023, of all that is good and decent, the left is the real oppressor. But the one I want to ask you about is the one that Senator Hirono asked you about, and she read you an excerpt. I'll read the whole thing. A tweet from August 9, 2024. Picked this up in my base exchange at Buckley Air Force Base several weeks after J6. This is what the Biden-Harris administration ushered in. After a government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, they immediately demonized the men and women in uniform. Then they purged conservatives and Christians with their shot mandates. Brilliant planning, actually. Tell me what the phrase that you wrote, government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, what does that mean with reference to January 6th?
Thanks for bringing this up again, Senator. I like the verses that you've read. I agree that it matters a great deal that we try and speak truthfully. I'll remind you respectfully that the comments that I made that you've just shared were shared on my X account, I presume, while I was a private citizen in this country. In 2024, I'd been out of uniform for 3 years, and in fact, with absolutely no intention of returning to public service, I was quite enjoying private life and being able to criticize people as I wish.
So they were a sincere reflection of what you had in your heart at the time you wrote them?
Well, in as much as those statements were properly contextualized, and I can't speak to the context from which you've read, I always do try and speak honestly, and again, reserve the right to be wrong about any of my views.
But how about just the phrase? What does, with respect to January 6th, what does your phrase, a government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, mean?
Let me share, too, that while I do recognize the other quotes that you've read, I don't recall having written those words that you just read about January 6th. And so that could be partly a memory problem. It could be that I retweeted something and that quote has been pulled, but I don't recall using that phrase. What I do believe is that private citizens in this country can have the right to express their views, as mean or as wrong as they might be, and that the men and women in uniform defend the right of the private citizen to speak those views, and that my concern while I was in uniform was, in fact, that the kind of partisan rhetoric that I had used, that you've just quoted from, for example, was actually being inserted into the military workplace in a way that divides troops. And so I was trying to hold our military cultural and workplace environment accountable to a standard of nonpartisanship, as I've indicated, so that we could thrive in unity and not division. Now, private citizens have the right to say those things.
I completely agree. Private citizens have the right to say and believe whatever they want. This is a hearing about your qualifications for the position. The qualifications are essentially, in my view, a mixture of three things: background, character, and judgment. It's about judgment. I don't want to confirm somebody into the Pentagon who would fall for a conspiracy theory that a fourth grader would find incredible. If I searched your social media and I saw you praising the Great Pumpkin over and over again, you would have the right to have that view, but I wouldn't want somebody who believed in the Great Pumpkin to be in the position that you're nominated for. And so if I'm thinking about people in the military, I know Virginia has an awful lot of people in the military. One of my kids is in the military. There are people in the military who are left, right, center, and maybe even more who are completely disinterested in politics, and we got to praise those. But how would somebody who's in the left or considers themselves in the left, serving in the Air Force, when you say the left lies about nearly everything it does, of all that is good and decent, the left is the real oppressor, how would any person who identifies that way feel any confidence that you as a leader would have their back?
Yes, Senator. I think it's a great question. It's one I actually share your concern for and care greatly about. Let me just share briefly in a 10-second answer that at the time that I departed from active duty, I had young men and women in uniform of all racial or ethnic backgrounds, certainly different political backgrounds, coming to me privately, sending me notes and saying, "Sir, I never knew what your political worldview was. I don't understand completely why you've chosen to now take a stand for these issues or write about what you did, but I respect you as a leader."
All right.
And if confirmed, I'd be happy to come
my
back.
time has run over, but I'll just, in yielding back to the chairman, I don't know where you were on January 6th. Most of us were here. A lot of us had a friend, a guy named Howie Liebengood, who was a Capitol police officer who died as a result of January 6th, whose widow, Serena, is one of my constituents. When I hear somebody, anybody, talk about what happened here as a false flag or a hoax, it is insulting to those of us who are here, and it's particularly insulting to those who lost loved ones that day. I yield back.